Whoa. It wasn't doing that before.
There's a real visceral sense of being immersed in the game when you're holding something physical in your hand and you do it. The controller itself really contributes to the feeling that you are a wizard.
You have a magic wand in your hand, and Finn has a magic wand in his hand. It's the best one-to-one connection with a character that I've ever felt.
When we first took the controller and whirled it over our head and saw the apprentice conjure a tornado out of the ground, it's like, that is something different. That is not just another press the button and cast your spell. He just conjured a tornado. This is awesome. Sorcery High Concept started out as a very iconic demand. What if you one day found a magic wand in a box? What would you do with it? What would you try? What would you hope and imagine that it could do?
This is fun!
Sorcery was designed from the ground up to be a move title. With a lot of games, you start sort of retrofitting, saying, oh, we're going to take an existing game that has a DualShock control scheme, and then try to figure out how to work the move into that. But with Sorcery, from the very beginning, we built everything around making the move an essential central part of gameplay.
Of many places that I've worked, our studio's a little different in that we are a little more physical, and we kind of embrace that, especially working with the move. So when you cast a spell and to throw up your arm in a shield is really something that came out of how we talked about the game.
A lot of the motion control games that you see, sort of like it's detecting that you're doing something, but it's not precise. What really excites me when I play Sorcery is the degree of control you have. So if I'm using it to cast arcane bolts at somebody, it actually matters where I'm pointing the controller at the screen. But we could also let the player put English on it. So for example, if you cast like this or cast like that, that actually hooks the bolts around and arcs them in interesting ways. So it becomes a very technical, a very skill-based gameplay experience.
Fighting is active. Drawing a firewall, throwing a bolt through it. Those movements are quick, fast. Spell switching is on the fly, and it's a movement, it's not a button press.
As you get deeper into Sorcery, you learn more spells. You gain a command over the elements: ice, fire, wind, electricity. Then we found that combining them was cool. Cast your whirlwind through fire, the fire is sucked up off the ground and your whirlwind becomes a fire tornado. Cast your bolts into a fire-nado and fire bolts are multiplied and spread throughout the arena. Every spell in Sorcery can be combined with the other spells to produce a deep combo system that lets you just attack your enemies in a wide variety of ways to maximum advantage.
A troll! That thing is huge! This way, come on!
The boss fights in our game is where the player has to really put his mind to work. You have to be aware of your environment, you have to be aware of your arsenal. Everything that we put into a boss fight is indispensable in taking out the boss.
Hey, you! Sorcerer!
Finn, we don't have time for this.
You don't have time for not this, smart cat. Potions are the way to power.
Alchemy is the flip side of all the action gameplay. In Alchemy, you're using the motion controller, but it's not under the pressure of combat.
You discover many unusual ingredients. So our alchemy system, which is the key to level progression, involves mixing these elements together. And we make sure that with our move, we do this in a very visceral sort of a way.
We want to create a feeling of that you weren't just fighting things all the time, that you really were a wizard who had a wide variety of different magic at your disposal.
With the move controller, we found that you have an enormous breadth of things you can do to accomplish simple tasks. And even though these things are often not hard or challenging, they connect you to the magic you're creating in a way that a button just never would have done. That's the heart of what makes the motion control experience potentially a permanent part of serious hardcore gaming, is people are realizing that this device lets me have a much richer interaction with the world than any traditional gaming device. I feel that we've given people a really solid, playable game experience that uses the move like it's meant to be used as a serious game and control device, to reach down and pick it up and to be that apprentice who is reaching out and grabbing the wand, the master's wand, for the first time and feeling the power of it surge through him, just as you realize the power that you yourself are experiencing as a player. The genesis of the story that we finally ended up with, we were all sitting around and we had been given the mandate to take this move controller and make a magic wand game out of it. We wanted opening that move box to be that moment of discovery, like, what is this? This is something I've never seen before.
It feels powerful.
And it really formed the foundation of the story. It was going to be about learning how to do all this new stuff you'd never done before. And we wanted the story of the game to be the same way, a journey of discovery, a hero's journey. We were after an archetypal story that would be a coming-of-age story and a story where a young apprentice makes a simple mistake, unleashes the terrible forces of the world, and has to grow into become himself a great sorcerer when his master is unable to save him from his folly.
Here we are, the entrance to Loch Barrow. Beyond this door is the domain of the restless dead, the forsaken spirits of the final war.
The final war?
Between the elves and the humans.
The world of sorcery, it's a world where the realm of Faerie and the human realm are very closely intertwined, and there are portals that let you pass back and forth between the two worlds. There is a war between the humans and the fairies about 100 years before the game takes place. And since then, the realms have pretty much kept to themselves. There are very few people have crossed back and forth between them. But as the game starts, the portals are thrown open again, and all of a sudden you're thrust back into this world where the creatures from the realm of Faerie are crossing over.
Great sorcerers defended the world from unspeakable evil. And everyone bowed down to them and gave them treasure and stuff.
And stuff? Really?
Just prepare to be amazed.
You have no idea what you're doing.
A lot of the emphasis in the story in Sorcery is more about the relationship between the characters. For most of the game, there is Finn, our protagonist, and Erline, the magical cat who accompanies them. When the game starts off, Finn and Erline don't really get along very well. She's kind of obnoxious, he's kind of like full of himself.
I shouldn't have said anything. Loch Barrow is far too dangerous. You might get hurt, and then I would never forgive myself.
Right then, Loch Barrow.
Well, this should be entertaining.
If you think of your mage that stands in the back and uses his wand and knowledge just to control the world, that isn't Finn. Finn drives forward. He thirsts for knowledge, but he thirsts for adventure more than anything.
There are a couple of things we do to sort of play with the fantasy archetypes. One thing is to sort of dig deeper into the reality of the archetype. We have an evil queen, the Nightmare Queen, and we actually worked really hard to create sort of psychological depth to her.
You can feel a little bit of sympathy for the best of best villains. In the Nightmare Queen, her daughter has been stolen. And that's a believable anger, right? You can look at the Nightmare Queen and go, yeah, I'd be pissed. That believability makes her all that more terrifying because you can understand and maybe you could see yourself be that villain.
Busted!
Erline was a character that was really important to our story. We face a lot of challenges with Erline because we have to have this integral character of our game be a cat. Just like with Finn, Erline goes through ups and downs throughout the story, and we had to be able to create this furball to be able to display emotion along with our character because she is such an important part.
We needed a character that needed Finn. The darkness of her character, that slight tone of being unsure really helps us tie her to Finn because he's so brave and bold. She needs his support to go through the next door.
A big part of the story of Sorcery is the way these two characters respond to what's going on around them and sort of change over the course of the game. By the end of the game, they're really, really on the same team, they're working together, and the story of how they come together and how they learn about each other is a big part of the story of Sorcery.
There's a coming-of-age story both for Finn and for Erline at the same time. Both of you go from being these silly teenage kids at the beginning to realizing the mantle that destiny has forced upon you.
With traditional Celtic music, you have instruments like whistles and flutes, you've got bagpipes, Uilleann pipes, you have stringed instruments like mandolins and also hammered dulcimer.
It has a very large range. So there are moments that seem very traditional and folksy, and then there's big epic moments that sound like, you know, a Hollywood film, and a lot of places in between that.
It was very important to have a Celtic-inspired score, so that's what we were looking for Sorcery. But we wanted to do something a little bit unusual with Celtic music and to somehow kind of stretch the use of the instruments and maybe resample them at certain times in order to give the world of sorcery its own unique sound. So it was inspired by Celtic music, but it was a little bit twisted at the same time.
We have drums, we have flutes, we have something that feels kind of medieval. But at the same time, we didn't want to be limited to that. We didn't want it to feel like we were at a Ren Fest. And so when we spoke to the composer, we said, you have the license to bring in other sounds to create a wider sound palette. And this wound up being essential to creating this feeling of magical strangeness of the world.
Mark is an absolutely brilliant composer. He just seemed to be the perfect fit for Sorcery because not only does he have just sort of a great command over melody and a great command over the orchestra, but he also has a very unique collection of exotic and unusual instruments. And these are sounds that Mark incorporated into the score in just a really, really brilliant way.
Mark Mancina, he got it right basically right off the bat. It was a real joy to work on this game because it all just came out naturally. He's an amazing composer. I think the biggest challenge with game audio is that everything needs a sound, but there's so much that's happening that eventually there's too many sounds for the brain to even process. So you have to choose what you want the listener to hear at any given moment. And on Sorcery, it was definitely spell casting. You had environment sounds, you had the character sound effects, and then the music.
With the in-game sound, a lot of what we were looking for is to give the player clear cues as to what he should be experiencing at a given moment. And so we made a big distinction between exploration music and between combat music. And it was designed so that even if you don't quite realize that you're in danger, all of a sudden you start to get the beginning sounds of combat music starting up, and you're like, oh no. You start looking around because you get this feeling of, oh, the music is letting me know that I'm in danger, even though I don't quite realize what the nature of the danger is.
The whole spellcasting system is based on natural elements, fire, wind, ice. We wanted to make sure that the sounds were natural, but also magical. We want to have the sound respond to the force that you're using. So if you really fling it, it's going to be a lot more powerful sounding than if you're just kind of waving it around. You feel it. It's not just something that you hear, it's something you feel in your chest when you fire it off. It's about the loudest the game gets is when you have a fire tornado and you're shooting arcane bolts into it. There's a level of destruction that is unmatched throughout any other part of the game, and it's really fun.
You get the feeling of hearing these great melodies and having some great music and great harmony, but at the same time, you're also hearing all of these magic sounds that are sort of woven into the game.
It's a really good sounding game. The dialogue's fantastic.
You are seriously suggesting I drink something I found lying around in a tomb?
Come on, where's your sense of adventure?
The music is great. The spells sound great. The environments are great, and they all play well together. I'm really proud of how Sorcery has come out.
From the beginning, we wanted it to be based around Celtic mythology, and we wanted a particular feel toward the world, so this feeling of a world suffused with magic.
Our biggest draw was the Irish culture, and Celtic influence in general. If it came from Northern Europe, it's probably in our game somewhere. We fight banshees. We bring up ancient war spirits. We have Celtic pixies running through magical forests. Ancient things called bogies. Bogies were the critters in the night that stole children and things from your cupboard. It's filled with knots and ghosts and sprites and bogies, but really it's brought into a modern understanding.
We wanted to make sure to ground our game in some real mythology because we were going for an archetypal story. We wanted something that would be close enough to the medieval fantasy themes that gamers are very familiar with, but still fresh enough at the same time that it would feel like a new take on them.
With each of the major environments, we were looking for ways to push them outside of what you're familiar with. We wanted to create the sense that you're someplace else, someplace strange, someplace that's not the real world.
The foresting door! I can see it!
We took our worlds and we really gave them a rich visual treatment that made them look just frankly stunning and beautiful. And a place that, even if you weren't playing the game, you would be really enjoying just getting to walk through it and sort of marveling at the architecture and the flora and fauna, the way the light played off the surfaces.
The elves who built a lot of this stuff, they don't build like humans do. They grow things organically. There's something sort of unsettlingly strange about the way the buildings are constructed in these spaces. They're not built like normal human buildings. So all of the ruins that you see in the Endless Stair, they don't feel like crumbled stone. It's like the stone has all been like grown like plants. Everything has sort of this sinuous feel to it, and then it's toppled and fallen over. What we want is the player to always feel like that there is this sort of sense of menace in the world. When you first start off, you travel to the realm of the dead, and it creates a very particular sort of mood at the beginning of the game that immediately takes you outside of being in the real world.
The whole idea behind Lockbarrow is wandering through a graveyard on a midsummer's night.
It's this enormous ruined fortress that is filled with mist, and there's ghostly hands that are reaching up out of the ground every place you go.
We call them the Restless Dead, long-lost battle spirits from Irish Celtic songs. In our world, we really draw on those ancient legends. Those were really a lot of the deep inspiration behind most of the critters that you'll find.
We have several different base enemy types. We have the Restless Dead, we have the Forest Sylphs, and we have the Bogies, which are goblin-like creatures.
There's all different types of bogies. There's fire shamans, ice shamans, there's bogey suicide bombers that have big bombs above their heads. There's warriors that just go berserk and run at you. We tried to create a silhouette and a profile that was far enough removed from goblins and trolls that it could be a fresh and original character.
Hey!
Sylphs in the fairy forest really come from the classic sense of pixies. Little butterfly wings and the sugar plum dances.
Sylphs are kind of corrupted fairies. When you first encounter these sylphs, you're thinking, oh, that's a fairy. That's a nice fairy. But then that fairy comes up to you and slaps you in the face with a twig. And you're like, what's going on? Personally, through hours and hours of playing the game and testing the game, the sylphs are the absolute bane of my existence.
The creatures that we've developed for sorcery really draw from those global legendary critters. Ghosts, goblins, things that move in the woods. Just those childhood dreams that we all grew up, we all heard about in stories, those things that are timeless across every culture.
PlayStation